So thank y'all very much for attending this SE 101 class. This is a beginner class on how to use Story Engine. I am going to share a doc with y'all real quick. This is just my process inside Story Engine. It's going to veer a little different from what I'm going to show y'all today because I like to present options for y'all. But this pretty much breaks down what I normally do inside Story Engine. So hopefully y'all find that helpful. I am going to share my screen. So this is what y'all should see whenever y'all log into Sudowrite. And of course, you'll have all your projects. You'll see our little icons. This is for Canvas content, which is Sudowrite proper. Click on that and it'll take you directly to Canvas. But we are going to focus on Story Engine. So for all these that have Story Engine content, you would actually just click on those and it will take you directly to Story Engine. That is after you have started and actually have content in a project. But we are going to make a new one. So the first thing you want to do is title it. And that way, whenever you go back out here, you know what is what. And if I was to come down here and open up another one, that would then go to the top, just so y'all know it does rearrange by order of the last one opened. So today I wanted to show y'all a little something different from the normal Story Engine. Like I said, my usual process is in that doc. So feel free to combine this with anything I show you today. I will open up for questions after each little section. But generally, I like to keep these very casual. So if you have a question, you're welcome to unmute yourselves and ask. Like I said before, it's very hard for me to see things in chat as I'm doing this. And plus, I'll tend to get lost in chat. So one of the things people like to do is to do short stories. Now, this isn't a perfect method that I'm going to show you, but I will show you what I've been doing lately for my short stories. So we are going to do horror today. And I am going to tell Story Engine to, I don't know what I want to write, so I'm just going to have it make some stuff up for me. There we go. So I'm just going to have it write a collection of 12 horror short stories and see what it comes up with. And there you go. So let's see. A lot of times I will tell you right now, it won't do 12. Let's see. It actually did 12 this time, which is awesome. I'm going to go ahead and do my style box here. And I'm going to keep it brief. Let's just do, I'll tell you a little trick I use. I have a whole project inside Story Engine where I put my frequently used prompts here. So I want to take these back into that project. And the format really doesn't matter here. I just like doing it this way where you see one on each line separated by a comma, because as you're working with Story Engine, especially in your full-length novels, you're going to want to change up your style per chapter based on what you actually need for that chapter. But for horror, we're going to want bloody depictions of gore and graphic violence. Let's see how well it does with this. Does anybody have any questions on this so far? Like how to use the genre or style box? You said you're welcome to unmute yourselves.
Yeah, so you're saying change this by chapter. Like if I'm doing like a B story a chapter that focuses on like a B-story romance within a horror novel, when I start that chapter, I'm going to go to style and put romance or whatever it's niche of romance I want to pitch that towards. And then on the next chapter where it's, where we're back in the horror plot, I'm going to go and change that to horror. So I'm changing that style box throughout the process, like you say, chapter to chapter.
Correct.
Is that, wow,
So,
okay.
something I like to do, normally my genre box is like a mix of various genres and subgenres. So I could have horror, action, mafia, any, number of things, just because I want it to pull from those different elements. I also utilize themes and tropes in the genre box. So you can do that as well. Just remember to change out those themes per chapter, just like you would do for the style box. People also put tropes and themes in the style instead. That's really personal preference. Normally my style box gets maxed out, so it's easier for me to keep those in my genre box. So like for my dark romance books, first of all, if you write romance, I don't like putting the word romance in genre. I always joke, I can put romance here in this horror story, and more than likely at one point of a story, the serial killer will go up to the victim, tell them, hey, we'll get through this together, and then chop off her head. If you have the word romance, you will constantly see the variations of we'll get through this together lines. So I use romanticism, or if I can, I just avoid the word romance altogether. So
Nicole, I'm sorry, Nicole, could you just step back for a second? And when I open up Sudowrite, I don't recall this page being there. What I get is just start writing. So maybe I missed how you got there.
You're getting this page right here?
Right there, correct. Okay, how did you get the story? Okay, it's over there on the left. Okay, I'm sorry.
And like I said, whenever you're in these project things right here, of course, I don't have one that doesn't have it.
Okay.
So anytime you see this little bookmark thing, that tells you you have Story Engine content.
Okay, thank you.
So you can always click there and go directly to it.
Got it.
So another thing I like to do for the style box, and I learned this from Mira Gold actually, is instead of changing up the whole style box, or it might have been CC, sorry. They're both awesome. So I'm always learning constantly from both of them, like every single day. But what I like to do now is the first half of my style box will be overarching phrases and words that apply to the whole story. So of course, if you have mafia, you're going to have like the dark, gritty tones or some tense situations, things like that. And then the last half will be the words that I change out per chapter to match what each scene needs. So your last words in genre and style have the most impact on prose. So keep that in mind. So you can tell Story Engine you want one thing, tell it what's going to happen in that scene, but your style box is going to say how that is going to happen. So if you want the violence, you want the bloody depictions of gore, if you want the comedy, whatever you're wanting, you're going to want that towards the end of your style box. Okay, so let's generate the characters here. Sorry, I should have done that while I was talking. Any questions while we generate some characters?
Hey, Nicole, we have one question from Jennifer. She was wanting to know about the filter versus no filter within Story Engine or Sudowrite as far as censorship whenever it comes to words, like maybe if you're using gore type related words like blood, gun, mafia, maybe, carnage, will any of those flag the system in Story Engine?
That is a really good question. So horror is not normally my genre. I love to read it, but I don't write it much. So I can't tell you specific words that would trigger there. But in general, you can write pretty much anything within Story Engine. I write dark romance that goes very, very, very dark. I can get Story Engine to generate prose for that. I have had dismemberment in my prose. It generated that. The one thing that I can tell you for sure will happen is whenever we're ready to generate, you're going to see you have the option to choose most accurate, best prose, or fastest. And these are just different LLM models that we use. I will tell you whenever you start to get to graphic or violent scenes or scenes of non-consent for your romance type stuff, most accurate, a lot of times will tell you it cannot generate that type of stuff. The good news is the other two models generally have no issue whatsoever with it. So as long as you're okay with just going to another model, I find it's easier to do that. You know, even if your preference is most accurate a lot, you just generate that one scene with these other two models. Another thing people play around with, we were actually doing that in Mira Gold and CC's last little class, is we were playing around with the wording. So if you think it's a certain word throwing things off, you can go into ChatGPT, ask it for what are some alternative words to this phrase, or what are some word styles for a horror story. And it'll give you some options, and you could try those out with whatever aligns with your vision. Mira Gold, would you like to add anything to that?
I think the one caveat to that is if you are writing young adult, the censorship police will come down on you and basically not allow you to write any content that may have minors in a sexual situation, whether it is consensual or not. And that is because that is more or less regulated. So it doesn't matter whether you are inside of Sudowrite Common or inside a story engine or any other platforms that you find on the AI, spectrum. That is one area that is regulated.
Yes, I'm glad you brought that up. So Jennifer, those technically R-rated words, those are fine. I use them all the time. I have gone extreme, very extreme with my non-consent stuff and used those specific words. Of course, I'm not, because this is a general lesson. I'm not going to say that word or put it in there, but I have used, I'm sure you can imagine, that word within Story Engine. And again, most accurate refused to generate that prose for it, but the other two models had no trouble with it. So as Mira Gold was saying, the minor thing, that is definitely an issue. Your characters, for some reason, it did not do it in this. It should. Let me take a screenshot so I can report this. They're working on some improvements right now, so things kind of come and go at the moment. But generally, your characters will come up with an age. If they do not, like in this instance, you want to put an age, especially if you're in romance and going to have those intimate situations. You don't have to have an exact age. You can just say late 20s, early 30s, something along those lines. But it does need an age to generate consistently. And that lets Story Engine know you're not using a minor. I know some people have come across the issue where they want to refer to something that happened to somebody when they were a minor, a very traumatic event. And Story Engine still would not do that, even though it was sort of a backstory, flashback, something like that. So the easy way to do that is, they might have that here when she was 15, such and such happened. The easiest way to just bypass that is to put 18 within Story Engine, put her age that way. When you make your edits, change the age to be whatever age you need in the final version. There's no sense in trying to fight Story Engine to get it to generate when that's really all you need to do is go and change that age later. Another thing it will trigger on is if you're doing like a shifter romance or furries. If you don't specify that your characters are humanoid or humanoid-ish, especially if you're like creating your own alien race. If you don't specify and Story Engine mistakenly believes it's a regular animal like a dog, cat, whatever, it's going to trigger the bestiality thing and it won't generate the prose. So let it know that it's a shifter or a humanoid that likes to dress up as a dog or whatever the case may be. All right, so in this instance, normally when I'm doing my characters, I believe I said this in the doc, I will edit this box to my liking, make sure I got like their physical descriptions, their age. I like to do habits, quirks, mannerisms, just to try to bring in something a little different to the story, especially if it's a romance and their habits and quirks are playing off of each other. Something I learned from a few users is incorporating, Enneagram types, Myers-Briggs types. Story Engine does understand that. So I can come down here and say, right, to include Enneagram types and speaking styles. Click rewrite. And you'll see how it brings in the Enneagram type, and then it tells you how each character speaks. So that's
Hey,
something.
Nicole, I'm sorry, you have one question in the queue from Michelle H. She wants to know if there are any plans to increase the word limit in characters. She said that she tends to max out the 700 words with some of her more minor characters or her major characters.
So they are, like, the character box being bigger is one of the most frequently asked for things. So the developers are working on various ways to see how they can make that happen for people. It may not be such a thing as an increased limit here in the character box itself, but there's a feedback channel. Mira Gold, if you don't mind, do you know where the link is for the feedback channel, feedback suggestions?
Yes, so if you go, you'd actually have to go outside of Story Engine, but if you go outside of Story Engine to the common dashboard page and you go up to next to the cog where you see the little question mark, click on that and it will actually give you the option to provide feedback in there.
There you go. It's the suggest a feature right here. And so if you go to that, you can actually, oh, look, they got some stuff planned. So you can actually see what they're working on there in researches to recognize tense. And like this person is saying, they write in present tense. The output's often switch, so they're researching that. Mobile support is planned, and you'll see all these others that are grayed out. This is a place where you can actually go into and upvote an issue. So if you see something that you like, hey, this one says, would be cool if Sudowrite could flag and correct grammar issues. If you like that idea, you can go into this and actually upvote it. And that's how they kind of determine what gets worked on next, is they see the most requested items that are going on for the feedback. So I would look through that. You could do a search for characters or character box and see if somebody has an idea for fixing this the way you would like and upvote it there. You can also make your own suggestion there, let other people upvote it. You're welcome to put your suggestion link in Slack. So a lot of people actually have mentioned something along the lines of you'll have your characters here, but then have some sort of, say, like a checkbox to where it'll have all your characters listed, and then you can mark with a check which character needs to be in scenes and stuff like that. So it would allow you to kind of utilize this box in a different way. So that's one option. For me personally, I don't do epic fantasies or anything where I have a whole lot of characters where I need the room. I've maxed out the box, and luckily it was just enough to fit everything I wanted in here. So let's say you can actually do settings in here, and that's what I did when I was maxing mine out. I had 3 settings for my fantasy book that I really wanted Story Engine to know what they looked like, where they were, and all those things. That way, every time it came up, Story Engine could pull that information for me. Now, it was a lot of information, so what I did was actually copied what I had, and I would go into ChatGPT and ask Chat to condense the information, but keep all the important details. So that allowed me to get in a few more words for each one by doing that for various things. And you could do the same with, just your people right here. If I had, because I got some that's, ooh, look at me, messing things up right there. That's a great thing right there, y'all. The restore button, you can go into your history, see how you have it before we did our rewrite, after our rewrite, after I messed it up. So I want to restore this one. So I have the character descriptions are like this for one character. So that's a great way to go into ChatGPT, ask them to condense things for you. So those various options. Another thing people use is, like I mentioned before, just take out whatever characters aren't supposed to be in that scene. So you can make a document here. Have it for all your characters. So once you have your characters described, all the ways that you want, all the details there, you could just pull from that document into the character box right here. So you're only having the ones that you want for each scene. I said, me personally, I don't write that epic fantasy or have so many that I can't usually squeeze into this box. So I get it in there some kind of way and just move on. So I would search
Hey,
this.
Nicole,
Mhm.
you have one question regarding archetypes. If you were going to add archetypes to your characters, when or where would you do that?
Mira Gold, if you don't mind answering that question, because I actually love the way you do it. Do you mind?
Okay. I tend to prompt within my synopsis before I generate my characters. I will generally put a prompt up at the very top of my synopsis card stating to add my archetypes to maybe 10 extra characters. Now, the way that Nicole did it, she actually went down to the bottom of her synopsis and she hit rewrite for her synopsis to add some content into her synopsis app during some classes. And when you are in there, make sure that you are including the information as commands. Like Nicole just put it inside of her brain dump. If
Mhm.
she were to generate that, it would actually add that to her content.
Yeah. So that's the way I've learned a prompt from Mira Gold to do it that way. So there's one. So as she said, you could use this rewrite box too. Now keep in mind, every time you use this rewrite, whatever words it comes out with, those are all getting deducted from your word count. So we've generated twice now. So just because I generate a third time and that's the one I go with, doesn't mean I get refunded all those previous counts. So each time you use that rewrite box, all those words are going to get deducted from your thing. So another way you could do it is just if you have a reference sheet or a ChatGPT, ask it for archetypes, see what fits your characters, put that in there. And that's all I could think of off the top of my head that's 3 ways I could think of off the top of my head to do it. But I would definitely just have it here in the character box. Now, for story arcs, like your character arcs for the story, I actually don't put that in my character box. I know a lot of people do. And again, this is just, there's so many ways that people do this differently throughout all of Story Engine. So use the method that works best for you. I do not put my character arcs in here. I like the archetypes in here. But for the character arcs, I leave that in my brain dump because normally my brain dump is maxed out. It's got every single detail I could think of that story. And so as I'm modifying my brain dump at each point of the story, the beginning, the middle, the end, I'm essentially putting how that character feels and how they're acting at that point in the story. So that's my way of doing it. So let's do to the outline real quick. So this is a recent update.
I'm sorry, just to jump in. So along with redoing the style box, like chapter by chapter, you're also redoing the brain dump.
No, I'm not messing with the brain dump once I get past it.
Okay.
That's
Okay.
That's just where I put
Alright.
my character arcs.
Gotcha. Okay.
So this is a recent update to Story Engine. Here, I believe in the last week, maybe 2 weeks. We used to just get 12 chapters as a default. And now we can choose from this novel outline, the hero's journey, Hollywood Beat, Story Circle, which I really don't use, but I would believe this would be great for your short stories. And of course, the romance outline. Now for novel outline, you're going to want to put your genre in the genre box before you generate for the novel outline. Because what it does, let me go ahead and do it. What the novel outline does is it takes into account your genre and how much information you have within your brain dump, synopsis, outline, and all that to actually fill out how many chapters it feels that you need. So it's going to look at all the information we have to the left of it. And it's going to say, okay, I can make this many chapters out of it for a horror story. And it's going to do that according to what it thinks you need. Another little trick is if you've already planned out your story and you know for sure you need 25 chapters, you can tell it. Right, 25 chapters. I would actually put that in brackets, but I don't mess with that. I know a lot of people do. They love it. I'm just not good at judging how many chapters I need for something. My method is letting it generate, and then I will actually go through and edit to make sure each one is the way that I want it. And this is the tricky part if you're wanting to do a collection of short stories like what we requested here, the collection of 12 short stories. So as you see in the synopsis, it brought each one, told us what each one needs. So we're going to check the outline real quick and see what it did. Let's see, receives a dog. Can everybody see this? Do I need to blow it up some? There we go. So she receives a dollhouse. So this one actually looks like it did pretty well as far as each chapter is a short story of its own. I know in previous ones, it liked to sort of encompass them all, like the last one I generated. The first chapter or two involved one character. And then she was doing some research, and during that research, it started introducing all of these other stories and everything. But I like the way this one came out like that. So not perfect, but again, if this was a story I was publishing, I would just go through and make sure everything's the way I want it. And this is another box that I like to fill up as much as I can. So put in some extra details if you know you want certain things to happen or certain things to be present, put that in there. Any questions on the outline?
No, it's more of a question for the generation of the beats into prose. There was a question asking if there was any way to possibly give a specific word count.
Like to have prose generate just so many words?
Yes.
Okay, so I have not discovered a way to do that. In general, in theory, the fewer beats you have, the less prose will be generated. That's a good rule of thumb to go by. But as far as saying, hey, I only want 1,500 words written here, I have not discovered anybody actually being able to do that. Feel free to correct me, Tomas or Mira Gold, if y'all have heard of people being able to do it. But just in general, if you want it short, just keep your beats short. I'm going to go ahead and generate the beats here so you can see what I mean. Now,
can you expand on your question for Nicole? You may need to unmute yourself.
Okay, I don't know if you can hear me.
Yes, we can.
Okay, I was reading something like when you're filling out an outline, like I already have most of my outline finished, so I'm slowly incorporating it into the outline section. But there's like there's a gap that I have between the ending chapter of Act 1 and a beginning chapter of Act 2. If I wanted to do that, would I be able? I read something about like putting the three I forget what you call them. I'm just going to call them dots because my brain's dead right now, to fill in gaps. So if I was to write part of like a chapter and then put 3 dots, does it incorporate what I've written above and then fill it in, or did I read that wrong somewhere?
that is not something I've heard of. Now,
Okay.
what I would do in that case is actually going to regular Sudowrite here. And you see where it says canvas. So you can pop up with an outline from this bottom right here. Pick which outline you want to go with. So you could generate the full outline and it's going to fill in the whole thing for you. You would give your little concept right here. This holds up to 500 words. So a brief little story summary. And you can ask it to generate the full outline. Again, each card, their words are going to come for your account, but that might help you get some ideas of what you want, like if you like something better. Or
Okay.
what I would do is if I know certain things, like let's say you said what you knew the first 3, let's just go with that. So I would fill these in with my knowledge of what I wanted to happen for those first three. And then this navigation is really weird. So let's say I don't know what I want in 4. I know what I want 5. So I would fill that one in. Don't know 6, no 7. So I have 2 things here now that I don't know what happens, right?
Mhm.
So you would go to this little, each individual card where it says fill me in, and it will take into account what the previous card said. So you could fill in
Okay,
these 3
perfect.
that you know, ask it to fill this in, and see how you like that. If you don't like it, you can actually generate options for this card. The only downside is you have to have, at least last time I checked, you had to have the whole outline filled in first. Like, let's say you finally got in all the holes filled and you went back, read through, and you're like, well, I don't really like this one. I like the way it generated this, but I don't like part 4. You can ask it to generate options for that card.
Okay,
And it'll
perfect.
pop
That
up
actually
with 3
works.
different alternatives.
Okay. Yeah, because I just have a couple little gaps I was trying to fill, so that actually works perfectly. Thank you.
You're welcome. It's a fun little thing to play around with.
Now, one thing that I do to fill up gaps is that I'll just open a new card for my beats, and I'll just write out whatever that scene needs to be beat wise, and then I'll just generate just those beats. And once it's through generating, I'll just plug that back into my manuscript. So there's so many different ways to do this. So make sure that you're playing with the system. Nicole has some multiple ways to do several different parts of the process. So make sure you're looking at her Google Doc.
And if y'all look in Slack, a lot of times you'll see, I know one person commented, it's overwhelming because all these people give such different suggestions. And I can see how it can be overwhelming, but keep in mind, we're not telling you do this and then do this and then do this. We're giving you these options because they've worked for us. So now it's your job to play around with each one, see which one you like. You know, you're not going to hurt my feelings if you say, oh, Nicole, your way is horrible. I love Mira Gold. She's the one that knows what she's talking about. You know, play around with it, find what works for you, because if you don't like the process, you're not going to stick with it. So Mira Gold, what you were talking about, you meant create another chapter of it?
I do. I actually just create a new chapter, and I will just go in and type out my beats. Maybe I only need 6 beats to fill the gap. I will type in my 6 beats, and then I will generate, and that will bridge that gap.
Okay, that's a good little method. So yeah, you see here, you know, these are everything that we had in our outline. Quote in 20 chapters from our outline. So you can actually generate multiple chapters of each. And you don't have to go in order. You know, we did chapters 1, but now I want to go work on chapter 3. So there we go. I can work on chapter 3 now. And then just use your beats that way. So before I go into anything else, this is a new feature they just released a day or 2 ago, check beats. What this will do is a lot of us have a header. So my header, I believe, is in my doc, but something I always do is to tell it my tense and everything. And I have more than all that, but use. So past tense, third person, deep POV, use vivid sensory descriptions. And then I can go further into, I can tell it I want vulgar language used, crude language used, depict graphic acts of violence. I could put all that in what we call a header. That's what this is. It's called a header. So normally I actually don't number my beats. You can, I just don't. But with this new change, you have to at least have your first beat numbered now. Because when I go down here, that's what tells this, okay, this is a header. This is your first beat. And you'll see it numbers these beats 1, 2, 3, 4, even though I don't have them numbered here. So it's going to tell you this is beat 1, this is beat 2, and so on. And you'll see this 1-2, that's what we call a stride. So when Story Engine works to generate prose, it generates in strides, which is 2 beats. Beat 1, 2, and then beat 3, 4. Now, even though I'm not numbering, so let me scroll down here again. So you see how it's saying this is beat 1, this is beat 2. Beat 3 is show Melanie's curiosity. So I'm going to come up here. I'm going to delete this space after this line. So there's no carriage return or anything like that. So now when I scroll down here, show Melanie's curiosity is beat 2, because without that carriage return, it combines beats 1 and 2. So that's a way you can play around with it. If your first beat is looking too, what we call too thin, you'll hear us say a lot, beef up your beats. And what that is I like to use the analogy, you can either ask Story Engine to make you a sandwich, or you can ask it to cook you a 5-course meal. And I have actually done this. We did this in a class. It came out hilarious. Might want to spell it
Hey,
right.
Nicole,
Uh-huh.
can you touch upon if you bring in your own outline into the outline section, can you touch upon how maybe that needs to look for an individual to ensure that they're able to open up the cards for their beats?
Yes, thank you for that. Yep. Okay, so on the beats real quick. So if you look at this, like that's just a pretend story, and this was actually pertaining to our story. Well, these two things are about the same amount of words, right? So when we're saying beef up your beats, we're not saying add a ton of words that are essentially meaningless. But if you look, like if you go in the kitchen and you make yourself a sandwich, that doesn't take a lot of ingredients or steps. But if you go into that kitchen and you start cooking a 5-course meal, that is a lot of ingredients and a lot of steps. So that is what we mean by beef up your beats. You want to make sure you are asking Story Engine enough to generate the 100 to 200 words that it needs to play around with. Otherwise, you might get what we call looping, where it's, might make up stuff to finish that stride because you didn't incorporate enough directions in it to give it enough words, and it'll just kind of repeat itself until it catches up. So keep that in mind of what you're actually asking Story Engine to do inside your beats. Are you asking it to describe a walk back to a cabin? Or are you asking it to describe the weather, the walk back to the cabin, who they're walking with, what their conversation is about, and all the things like that? So bringing in your own outline, if you hover over the question mark, you'll see that it says Act 1/introduction and all that. That is the format that you generally need. I will say it hasn't quite been updated, but like how you notice these chapter headings right here. If you're running low on words and you need, like, say, a dozen more words, you can delete these headers out. And you can actually now delete these out. You better not have just made a liar. Okay. Sometimes it likes to make a liar out of me on the spur of the moment. So this is actually something relatively new that I discovered, because when they changed the outline format, we definitely had to have that hyphen, and the word after it, then the colon. And if we did not have this right, so let's say I don't have that, you're really going to do that to me, aren't you? It's going to prove me wrong. But anyway, so now if you need a few extra words, you don't actually have to have that hyphen word and then colon. You can actually just have the words that pertain to that chapter. So that's a way to get a few extra words into your outline box whenever you need them. It was very frustrating at first because we couldn't figure out, some people were doing that, or they'd only have this Act 3. And then we discovered you actually had to have that hyphen, and then the drop-down box would activate for you for that chapter. Okay, so the beats. So I've gone over ways to beef them up, what we mean. Does anybody have questions on that? It would take a long time to actually go through the process of beefing these up. I normally spend, I would say, a good 20 minutes making these exactly what I want. Remember, the beats are where you're telling Story Engine what happens in the scene. Your style box is telling Story Engine how it happens. So if I'm writing a full-length horror novel and my first chapter is just, some introduction of characters, the friends having a good time and all that, and I look in my style box, well, I got these bloody depictions of gore and graphic violence as my last words. And I know this for a fact, that generating that first chapter where friends are getting together, just having a good time, somebody's going to die in a very graphic way. That's because that's what you've told Story Engine to do. You've told it, this is what I need to happen. This is how I need it to happen. So that's what we mean by making sure your last words are changed up and reflect how you want that chapter carried out. But normally I would go in through here. I don't like pronouns. You'll hear a lot of people talk about how, oh, a character showed up in my scene and they weren't supposed to be in this one, or a random character popped into my story that isn't even in the character list. A lot of times that is an issue with the pronouns. Or if you have, trying to see, I don't have it here. But if you have a beat, Sarah walks into the coffee shop and sees a man leaning against the counter. And you generated prose from that. Well, you know who she saw leaning against the counter, but all Story Engine knows is there's a man here that doesn't have a name. So Story Engine needs to create a name for that character, and that's what it's going to do. So let's say you're writing a thriller or a romance and this is their meet cute. And you want to say something like, you want to avoid that pronoun. So you say, Sarah walks into the coffee shop and sees Michael leaning against the counter. Story Engine is now going to go in the opposite direction and bring in that character Michael and have Sarah either reminiscing about prior conversations, what she thinks about Michael, things along those lines. But you don't want that to happen yet, right? Because this is their meet cute. So what I like to do is use parentheses. And I utilize parentheses for things I need Story Engine to know to write the story properly, but I don't want Story Engine to convey it to the readers. So I would say something like, Sarah and Michael do not know each other. Sarah and Michael do not talk to each other. That way it doesn't have them start a conversation here in this scene if I'm not ready for it, or in that beat. You know, in beat 5 or 7, then I might have one of them walk up to the other and start a conversation. But at this point in time, if I just left it, Sarah walks into the coffee shop and sees Michael, Story Engine is going to do something with that, more than likely veering from the story the way I want it to carry out. So remember to be specific. Tell Story Engine what you want your characters to do. You want to let Story Engine know where your characters are. If you have a specific time of day, it's the weather outside. One thing you'll learn is Story Engine tells time by the sun rising and dipping. So if you want a storm blowing in, let it know that. You know, be as descriptive as possible within your beats. And that is how you carry out your vision for the story.
Nicole, can you talk to how you have only beat 1 numbered and then you have some beats down toward the bottom numbered? Is there any specific format that you need to have those in?
Okay, so I just didn't delete all these. So me personally, I don't like having my beats numbered. And I say that because what I found was it was helping minimize some of the looping. It wasn't getting rid of it, but there were occasions where I had my beats the way I wanted them, but it still had some looping. So I just stopped numbering. I also found a pleasant side effect was I generally used to get about 100 words more for whatever reason in my prose without numbering my beats. That said, you
Nice.
can do it either way. You can leave it.
But now you have to number the first beat, correct?
Yes. Yes. So you can leave all the beats numbered if you want. Like this is one of those things that it is completely just personal preference. But now with this check beats box, you have to number this one, the first beat, because that is what tells Story Engine everything above that number is a header. And then it just carries on. And again, these spaces, these hard returns after each one, that also tells Story Engine it's a new beat. So, I mean, I don't need numbers for that reason. I know if I want these two combined into one beat, I'm just going to pop that up there and make it 1. But if I want them 2 beats, I just make a return. So there's that space after it, and it's going to count those as 2 beats. So again, that's just personal preference. But you do have to have that first one numbered. So I generated this in fastest. A lot of people like to number. This is nothing I don't do. Yeah, I veer from the norm so often. That's why I always encourage people, find what works for you. Play around with different methods. So this was fastest mode, and I love fastest. You could see all the little lines of, I know I scrolled kind of fast on there, I'm sorry. So this is starting it off. And you can see how many lines of dialogue it does right away. If you're writing a thriller, fastest is awesome for your intense scenes. Or if you're doing any kind of book where you all of a sudden need an action-packed scene, a fight scene, anything like that, anything that would otherwise might move clunkily or just the pacing won't be right for the reader and might bore them, try out fastest prose. I love the way it comes out. The downside to fastest is that a lot of times it will suddenly just stop generating, and I cannot tell you why. I've reported it as a bug. If you scroll down, like if something happened in your prose, as such as it stopping or whatever. Oh, I thought there was a feedback on this. There should be, because I have reported it before. So normally there's a thumbs up or thumbs down button. So if something just went really weird with this, you could report it to the developers and try to give them some feedback as far as which model you used, where it stopped generating, things like that. As fast as, like I said, it will generate all through here, and then all of a sudden it'll get, say, 5, 6, and then nothing else will come after it. So that's the downside to fastest. Now, me, I like to use Scrivener. So for all my writing, so I will actually just copy all this manually, but you do have a send to doc button down here. So you can send this and it'll show up in Sudowrite proper. And it'll even name it according to your chapter. And so you can type that this was fastest generation if you know you're going to do more than one of that. Go ahead, Mira Gold.
Yeah, so when you go back to Story Engine, can you go to that first stride in Prose and explain why you put fastest right there next to that first stride run?
So I normally don't do this. This is just for y'all's benefit. So if you're making more than one, like we have multiple chapters 1 right here, and I know I'm going to do a best prose and most accurate and all that. If I want to keep track of it, I'm going to put fastest here, because when I come over, there's this copy button right here. So if you really like your beats and want to use them for your other stuff, just copy and paste real quick, and you have your same beats and everything's formatted just the way you had it. But now you can see how it shows fastest on these models. But let's say I want best prose on this one. Now look, it just flipped it all over. So as I'm going through, I can say, oh, this was with fastest. Now, the more often you use this, you can generally read through and you'll know exactly which model it was that did it. So fastest, like I said, it's great. I actually use all 3 models whenever I'm generating things. Fastest is great for the action scenes. Best prose, I really like it for the dialogue too, and for giving me ideas. Because you will find best prose, I'm going to pause this. Best prose tends to veer away from the story a bit, especially as it's wrapping up a stride, and then it might start over and go back on track according to what your beats had. But if you're open to ideas, like, yeah, you know generally how you want your scene to play out, but you need some ideas, or if you're just open to it, when you generate best prose, a lot of times you're going to see it do something that was not expected from your beats. And you might be like, I hate that. Or if you're like me, you're like, hey, that's really neat. I think I'm going to incorporate that. And a lot of times I'll go back up to my beats and adjust it accordingly. But most of the time, I am picking parts of each generation. Like I might like this part, and I want to incorporate it with how this one started and everything. That's why I do all 3 generations, because I normally Frankenstein them all together and then edit with my own writing to get everything finalized the exact way I want it. And I thought of something as I was going. Oh, so I've hit pause whenever this one started, and it doesn't immediately pause. You'll notice it stops right here. And that's because it was getting ready to generate that next stride, the stride 3-4. So pause isn't going to stop right away. If I paused it right here, which I believe I did, you can see how much farther it went. That's because it doesn't stop until it gets to the end of that stride. What a lot of people do to have more control over the way the rest of the prose is going to go is they will read this over and edit it. So let's see. Let's say I didn't like this, so I would take it out. I'm going to start right there and click continue. If you click restart, it's going to start the whole thing over from beat 1. But what you could do is edit this to your liking. So this is great if you're wanting particular language, like vulgar or crude language, or people speaking a certain way and you haven't nailed that quite yet in Story Engine. Edit it to your liking, make them speak the way you want to speak. And whenever you hit continue, it actually takes into account all of your changes. And then what it was supposed to start over. Okay, so it did, but it still said 3-4. And I think that happened last time too. It's just a little quirk of the way it's generating at the moment. So you can see this was originally in the other strides that she gasped and jerked her hand back. And now the doll is moving, whereas before Melanie was just whispering to herself what did the doll want and everything. Now we have the doll, you know, the story is taking off in a little different way, just from our little edits. So that's one way to have more control and get the prose instead of letting everything generate like I did with this first one. This was the whole generation, 2,296 words. You can pause with each stride, edit it, continue, and then it'll take into account your edits and your language use and all of that for the rest of the prose. And a lot of people do that for each stride. That's how they do the whole thing. Start it for a stride. As soon as it starts that stride, pause it. Let it finish, edit, continue to go to the next stride and do all the same things. Any questions on that? I'm going to run most accurate and then kind of give y'all my thoughts on each version. Any questions before that?
So one of the attendees stated that it looks like, Best Prose doesn't stammer as much as the fastest. Have you seen that much in using the fastest, that it seems to stammer or stop a lot? I know that you'd mentioned that you'd seen it stopping at times.
So stammering as in an actual person stammering and stuttering?
No, stammering is in slowing down in the process.
Oh,
Never mind. The person said that they thought Melanie was stammering. I misunderstood.
oh. So like right here. And one thing that comes up a lot is people are trying to, yeah, so I see, okay, it does happen a couple of times. I honestly hadn't noticed that before. And it seems to clear up the rest of the way. I know people have mentioned a couple of times in the past that they want their characters to stutter. And that is something you could put in your character box to describe that character, is like Melanie speaks with a stutter. But I want to caution y'all as a reader, we don't like to read that. Set the scene, let it be known by having your character stutter for a few lines, a couple lines, whatever. But please don't carry through the whole book with your character stuttering. Many readers will not finish the book in that case. It's very hard to read. It draws us out of the story. And we really only need you to establish it right away that person stutters, and it typically sticks with us. Okay, so this was actually most accurate. Like I said, I don't normally do these labels. That is something y'all can do or not do. I just copy all of these into whatever writing program I'm using. You can use regular Sudowrite proper. Just send these all to the doc and label them. Because if we send this one's chapter 3. So I'll send this. And you'll see it labeled at chapter 3. Now, if I do the other chapter 1, it's going to come out chapter 1. So that's another reason people tend to label them. Like I said, I really don't care where the prose came from. I just care whether or not I liked it. So I kit bash them together and take little pieces of everything I like. So the different models, this is my thoughts on them. Most accurate is accurate, like to a fault. I'm trying to see. They're working on upgrading the beat section right now. So y'all don't have to worry so much like we have all these months of, I need to make my beats better. They're working on that. So just bear with us until they do the update. But most accurate, I cannot find a line here. But let's say you had your character clenching her fist in anger. You know, that was in your beats, that, you know, having an argument and she clenched her fist in anger. Somewhere in your prose is going to be, she clenched her fist in anger. I mean, do y'all really want that line in your books? So that's what most accurate will do for me. If I'm doing most accurate, I'm taking out any of those little, usually the things after the comma. Like this just says describing her thoughts and emotions. That's fine. But if it was actually giving me something I felt would be cliche, I would just erase it. Most accurate sticks to your beats more than anything else. Best prose, I like to joke, you're basically giving best prose your story. It's looking at it, laughing, and then saying, no, I can do better. And it's going to write something a little different from what you have in your beats and what you expected. One trick to kind of get around that is, instead of beefing up your beats, making them lengthy like we tend to say, Elizabeth Ann West actually does a class where she thins the beats out. So she might have one sentence just setting it up like, hey, they're in the bedroom. And then she'll have like a line of dialogue and she'll let it go at that. And best prose just fills in the gaps for each beat that's very thin that way. I did have somebody in the last class where they were surprised you could put dialogue in beats. They hadn't heard that. And this was a user that's been around for a while. So I want to make sure you understand that. You can put anything you want in your beats right here. If you want your characters to act a certain way, if you want them to do certain things, if you want them to say certain lines, put that there. It will carry over very nicely into the prose. And then, like I've already covered fastest, like I said, I think it's great for adding a lot of dialogue and just really good for the intense scenes. Do we have any questions on anything?
Actually, it's fairly quiet in there. You're doing a really good job.
I'm sorry, I felt like I was rushing through that. But feel free to, you can unmute yourselves and talk. I've covered pretty much everything I need to make sure is covered. So at this point, you can talk to me, ask any questions out loud, or ask them in chat.
Very, very helpful. Thank you so very much.
You're very welcome. I'm glad you found something useful.
Yeah. I'm just getting back to trying to write again. I had other work to do, another job, and Story Engine is kind of mind-blowing because I did a lot with chat, did a lot with Sudowrite. Now I'm going back through and I have outlines and chat, whatever. I'm going to try to plug things into Story Engine. And anyway, thank you very much.
You're very welcome. Have fun with it. Like I said, I can't stress it enough. I know I'll always repeat myself, but seriously, play around with it and find what works for you. If you look in the Slack channel, you'll see so many suggestions to do things various ways, and that's for your benefit. You can say, oh, this one looked, I think I'll try it this way. Try it, see if it works or not. It may or may not. You can mix and match. Lord knows I take a lot of Mira Gold's tips, but she does really advanced stuff. So I always joke with her. I like have these Google Docs with nothing but I put Mira Gold's tips or Mira Gold's prompts. And then I look at it and I get so daunted because it's so just, I mean, out there and detailed. But I'm like, you know what? I want to use this little chunk right here. So I'll take a little chunk and just use that in my work. So build upon everything that you see.
This is also amazing. I got involved with this in early February when there was only 10 of us on the Facebook group AI for Writers. And, just it's extraordinary. I think
Yes,
there's now over 3,500, probably 4,000 people in that group.
yeah, it's getting crazy. It's building up everywhere. I am going to stop this recording. That way I can stop sharing my screen and
Oh,
see
Nicole?
y'all and talk with y'all. Uh-huh.